The cage was older than the colony itself, a relic from the first war with their kind. It loomed in the center of the outpost yard like a scar of steel, wide enough to hold an air freighter and tall enough that the roof beams bowed under their own weight. Inside, chained and silent, crouched the reason most people crossed the yard with their eyes lowered, the alien giantess, her skin pale as moonlight, her hair matted from years of confinement. She did not speak, did not roar, did not plead. She only watched, and the watching was worse than violence. Men whispered that if you stepped too close with food in hand, she would rip your arm free and eat from a stump. Children dared each other to throw stones, then fled when her gaze fell on them. And still, day after day, she lived. Liam had grown up with the rumors. He'd heard the guards' laughter, the crude boasts of men who claimed they'd seen her slaughter her own kind in the war. Yet something about those stories never sat right with him. He was not a soldier, not a man of courage or ambition, just a worker who kept the colony's machines from rusting to pieces. But every time he passed the cage on his way to the maintenance shed, he slowed. It wasn't bravery, it was hunger, a gnawing curiosity he couldn't shake. The others saw a monster. He saw eyes that never blinked when they should, that never turned away, eyes that remembered. The colony command had ordered that she be starved to obedience long ago. Once a week, guards dumped in protein blocks and stale water through a chute high on the wall, too far for her long arms to reach quickly. She would gather the scraps in silence, eat slowly, then retreat into her shadowed corner. It was enough to keep her alive and no more. The policy was simple. She was not a prisoner, she was a warning. A reminder to the settlers of what waited beyond their walls if the war ever rekindled. On an evening heavy with dust storms, Liam found himself lingering again near the cage. He carried a tray from the mess, bread he hadn't finished, a flask of water, and a bruised fruit left behind by the others. The yard was nearly empty. The guards had sought shelter from the storm. He stood there, tray in hand, staring at the towering shape hunched behind the bars. His heart pounded with the weight of the decision forming inside him. "Don't," someone called from the barracks door. A mechanic he half knew shook his head. "You'll be dead before you touch the bars. That thing isn't tame." Then he vanished inside, leaving Liam with only the howl of wind and the steady, patient eyes fixed on him. His hand trembled as he stepped forward. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet the thought of doing nothing, of watching her waste away behind iron until there was nothing left but bones, felt worse. He pressed the tray against the lowest bar, sliding the bread through a narrow gap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her hand, larger than his chest, scarred and calloused, moved. Slowly, delicately, it closed around the bread. She did not snatch, did not crush, did not strike. She lifted it to her mouth and ate. The silence that followed was unbearable. Liam's breath came shallow, expecting her to lash out at any moment. Instead, she reached again, this time toward the flask. He pushed it forward, nearly dropping it in his haste. She drank, tilting her head back, the muscles in her throat working with a grace that unsettled him. When she finished, she set the empty flask down with care, as though afraid of breaking it. Only then did she speak. The sound was rough, guttural, shaped by a mouth unused to his language. One word, broken yet clear. "Stay." It struck him harder than a shout. He stumbled back, staring at her. Her eyes locked onto his, no longer the empty stare of a beast, but something sharper, searching. He wanted to ask why, wanted to demand what she meant, but the storm's wind carried his courage away. He turned and walked quickly toward the barracks, pulse hammering in his ears. Behind him, the giantess shifted in her chains, the faint rattle following him across the yard. She did not roar. She did not strike the bars. She only watched him leave, and the words she had spoken hung in the air between them like a vow not yet fulfilled. That night, Liam lay awake in his cot, the walls of the barracks rattling with dust-laden wind. Around him, men snored or muttered in their sleep. He thought of her hand closing around the bread, careful not to touch him. He thought of the way she had placed the flask down with the gentleness of someone who remembered fragile things. Most of all, he thought of that word, "Stay." It was no plea. It had carried weight, command, and something else, something he could not name. He closed his eyes, but the image of her eyes behind the bars burned brighter than the colony's harsh floodlights. For the first time in years, he feared not the storm outside, but what waited within himself, something restless and dangerous, something that would not let him walk past the cage again as though it were only iron and shadow. By morning, he knew the others were wrong. She had not killed him. She had claimed him. The next day, Liam avoided the yard as long as he could, keeping his head down in the maintenance shed and letting the hiss of welding torches and the clatter of tools drown out his thoughts. Yet no noise could quiet the memory of her voice. He told himself he wouldn't go back, that he had been reckless, foolish. Still, as dusk fell and the guards changed shifts, his feet carried him to the cage as though his body had already made the decision without asking his mind. She was waiting. The moment he stepped into view, her head lifted from the shadows, and her eyes fixed on him as if she had been watching the yard for hours. His chest tightened. She didn't move, didn't speak, only followed him with her gaze until he stood again before the bars. He carried another tray, half an excuse, half an offering. A heel of bread, 2 boiled roots, a cup of water. Food meant for him, now meant for her. When he slid it through the bars, she accepted with the same deliberate care as before. This time, after she ate, she lifted one massive finger and pointed at him. Name! The sound startled him. He stared, wondering if he had misheard, but her lips formed the word again, halting, shaped by unfamiliar tongue. Name! His throat was dry. Liam! She repeated it, breaking it in two. Liam. The syllables heavy but not clumsy. She touched her chest with her hand, the chains rattling. Kira. The name was like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through him. She had a name. She was not the nameless monster of the colony's warnings. She was Kira. He whispered it again, and her eyes brightened faintly, as if the sound of her own identity in another's mouth mattered more than the food. That night became the first of many. He returned when he could, bringing scraps, sitting near the bars until the cold seeped into his bones. Each time she said more. Words came slowly, broken and bent, but with startling clarity. She asked questions. Why here? Why a cage? Why me? He answered as best he could, ashamed at how little sense his own people's cruelty made when spoken aloud. He told her of the colony, of the settlers' fear, of how her people had been painted as monsters in every story he'd ever heard. She listened, silent, her great hands resting on the ground like chained pillars. As the nights passed, she learned faster. She repeated words until she could string them together. Her voice remained harsh, but her meaning sharpened. You not same. Others laugh. You bring. She tapped the bars. You see. And he did see. Her intelligence was undeniable. Her patience deeper than the oceans he had never crossed. When she smiled, rare, fleeting, it was not the savage curl the guards expected, but something quiet, almost hesitant, as though she'd forgotten how. But secrecy never holds forever. One evening, when Liam returned late from repair shift, a fellow mechanic cornered him near the mess. You're feeding it, the man hissed, eyes wide with disbelief. Don't bother denying it. I saw you. You're mad, Liam. You'll get us all killed. Liam tried to shrug him off, but the warning gnawed at him. If word reached the guards, punishment would be harsh. Yet when he thought of Kira waiting alone in the cage, her chains rattling in the dust storm's howl, he knew he would go anyway. That night when he brought food, Kira studied him with unusual intensity. Afraid, she said. He almost laughed at the absurdity of being read so easily. Yes. Her hand curled around the bars, the metal groaning. They hurt you? They will if they find out. She leaned forward, and for the first time her eyes softened, not with hunger or curiosity, but with something that looked like sorrow. You give, you kind. I not forget. The words settled heavily on him. Not forget. It was a promise, one that seemed to bind them tighter than the chains around her wrists. A week later, the bond was tested. A prisoner transport arrived, bringing with it several other alien captives. Unlike Kira, they were loud, snarling, defiant. The guards dragged them into cages smaller than hers, prodding them with electrified rods. One, a male nearly as tall as Kira, broke free for a heartbeat and lunged, not at the guards, but at Liam, who happened to be crossing the yard with a toolbox. Before he could react, Kira's roar split the air. The sound was thunder in stone walls. She hurled herself against her cage, chains straining, and the sight of her fury froze the other captive mid-strike. Guards swarmed in, beating the alien down, but Liam's eyes stayed locked on Kira. She wasn't looking at the attacker, she was looking at him. That night, when the yard had quieted, he returned again. He didn't bring food this time. He brought only himself, trembling from what he had witnessed. Kira pressed close to the bars, her voice low and certain. I keep safe. He shook his head, voice raw. You can't. Not in chains. Her eyes narrowed as if weighing his words. Then she reached her hand forward, curling her fingers through the bars until they nearly brushed his own. Then you break. The air between them was electric, heavier than the storms that battered the colony walls. He could not answer, not yet, but her gaze told him she already believed it was only a matter of time. When he left that night, her final words followed him through the dust and dark. You are mine. The guards found out sooner than Liam had feared. It was not through betrayal by his fellow mechanics, but through Kira herself. She refused the food they shoved through the chute, batting it aside, letting it rot untouched. Days passed, and her silence turned to violent outbursts, chains shattering against the bars, the air splitting with roars that made the outpost tremble. The men swore she was starving herself in some alien tantrum. But Liam knew she would only eat from him. They dragged him from the workshop one evening, soldiers hard-faced beneath dust-streaked helmets. He did not resist. He knew where they were taking him before they spoke a word. The commandant's office smelled of iron and old paper. Behind the desk sat a man whose every line of speech seemed carved from granite. You've been feeding it, he said, no accusation in his tone, only certainty. Liam said nothing. The silence was answer enough. The commandant's lips twisted into something close to pity. Do you know what that thing is? A killer of men, a symbol of what waits beyond these walls. And you've made it pet. The beating that followed was methodical, meant not to kill, but to break. They left him on the barracks floor, ribs aching, mouth full of copper. The other men avoided his eyes. By nightfall, he should have felt only shame and regret. Yet what haunted him most was the thought of Kira waiting in her cage, wondering why he hadn't come. When he finally staggered into the yard under cover of darkness, she was there, pressed against the bars, as though she had known he would come no matter how broken. The moment she saw him, her fury ebbed into stillness. She lowered her face until it nearly touched the iron, voice low and rough. Hurt you? He nodded, every breath a knife. Yes. Her chains rattled with restrained violence. For a moment he thought she would rip them free, storm the barracks, and end the colony in blood. But she stilled herself, closing her hands into fists until they trembled. No more, she said. He slipped a scrap of food through the bars, a crust of bread stolen from a mess, and watched her eat slowly, gaze never leaving him. To the guards, she was a monster starved into obedience. To him, she was a prisoner who had chosen defiance in the only way left to her. But defiance was noticed. The next day, they devised a spectacle. Liam was forced into the yard under armed escort, bruised and limping, while the guards taunted Kira. They tossed chunks of meat just out of reach, jeering at her hunger, waiting for her to lash out. When she did not, one soldier shoved Liam forward, close enough that her chains rattled inches from his skin. Go on, the guard sneered. Show us your monster. Kira's chest heaved. For a heartbeat, Liam thought she might strike, might tear through iron to end the mockery. But her eyes stayed locked on his, burning with something deeper than rage. Slowly, deliberately, she sank to her knees. She did not move again until the guards, confused and frustrated, dragged Liam back. That night, he returned on his own terms, slipping past the patrols. Kira waited as always. She leaned close, her voice a rasp barely above a whisper. They test. Want kill. But I'd not hurt you. Never? His throat tightened. They'll never stop. Not until you break. Her eyes narrowed. Then you break me free. The words hung heavy between them, heavier than the chains. He had thought of it before, in the quiet hours when sleep would not come. He had imagined finding keys, cutting power to the yard, watching her tear the bars apart. But those were dangerous fantasies, half-dreams he dismissed by morning. Now she had spoken them aloud, and they could not be unsaid. He shook his head, though his voice betrayed him. "If I help you, they'll call me traitor. I'll lose everything." Her hand pressed against the bars, massive fingers curling around iron. "Already lost," she said softly. "Not theirs. Mine." The claim should have chilled him, yet instead it steadied the storm inside. She was right. His loyalty to the colony had withered the moment he first slid bread through the bars. He had already chosen her, though he had not admitted it even to himself. Days blurred into nights. The guards grew harsher, beating Kira when she refused food, dragging Liam into questioning whenever they saw him near the yard. Still he returned. Their bond had become more than necessity, it was inevitability. She spoke his name like a vow, and he answered hers with the reverence of prayer. At last, the decision came not as a thought, but as a truth, fully formed in his chest. He could not leave her in chains. He could not stand by while she was starved into silence. The colony demanded she remain a symbol of fear. He would make her something else, something free. On the night he chose, the air was heavy with storm again, the yard cloaked in dust and thunder. He pressed his hand to the bars, his voice low, certain. "Tomorrow, I'll come. I'll open the cage." Kira's eyes gleamed in the dark. Her lips curled into that rare, fleeting smile he had come to crave. She leaned close, her breath warm against his skin. Together. When he left, the storm broke overhead, lightning cutting the sky in jagged lines. Liam walked into it without looking back. For the first time, he felt not the weight of chains, but the promise of their breaking. The storm came as if summoned by their secret pact. Lightning forked across the sky, wind tearing banners from poles, sand whipping into the yard in choking waves. The guards huddled in doorways, their shouts lost to the roar of the gale. It was the night Liam had chosen. His hands shook as he carried the stolen ring of keys, their weight heavier than any tool he had ever held. Kira was already waiting. Even through the dust, he could see her eyes, twin embers, behind the bars. She rose to her full height as he approached, chains groaning like the bones of the earth. He pressed the first key into the lock. His breath caught when it turned smoothly too easily, as though the cage had always been meant to open. One by one, the locks fell away. The final bolt shrieked free, and silence filled the yard for a heartbeat. Then Kira moved. With a sound like thunder cracking stone, she forced the bars apart, metal bending under her strength. She stepped out into the storm, taller and more terrible than Liam had ever imagined. Yet her first act was not violence. She bent, placing her hand against his chest, steadying him as though afraid he might collapse. Alarms blared at last. Floodlights cut through the storm, soldiers spilling into the yard with rifles raised. Shouts pierced the night. "Contain it! Kill the beast!" Kira's roar drowned them out. She swung her chains like whips, scattering men like straw dolls. Bullets sparked off her skin, biting shallow wounds that only enraged her further. Yet, even in her fury, Liam saw her restraint. She struck to scatter, to disable, never to slaughter. Her eyes never left him, making sure he was unhurt as chaos raged around them. "Go," she bellowed, the word sharp clear. She swept him into her hand, cradling him against her chest as though he weighed nothing. He gasped at the sudden lift, the pounding of her heart loud in his ears. Together they surged through the breach she had torn in the gates, storm and fire swallowing the outpost behind them. They ran into the wastelands, the storm masking their escape. Kira's strides devoured the ground, her breath steady despite the wounds painting her skin. Liam clung to her, his fear shifting into awe. He had dreamed of freeing her, but he had never imagined this, being carried like something precious, shielded from every danger by the very being his people had caged. When at last the outpost lights faded behind the storm, Kira slowed. She set him gently on the ground beneath a jagged ridge of stone. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind screamed, sand lashing at their faces. Yet all Liam heard was the drum of his own heartbeat. He looked up at her. "There's no going back." Her gaze softened. the fury of battle dimming to something almost tender. "No," she agreed. "Back is cage. Forward is us." The word lingered between them, fragile and fierce all at once. He should have argued, should have reminded her that he was human and she was not, that the colony would brand him traitor, that her people might kill him on sight. But none of it mattered. Not after the nights at the bars, not after the first whispered word she had spoken to him. "Stay." She reached down, curling her fingers around him once more, lifting him with the same care she had shown when handling bread or water or his fragile name on her tongue. He did not resist. Her warmth surrounded him, her strength a fortress no wall could equal. For the first time, he felt the strange truth settle inside him like stone. He was safer in her grasp than he had ever been among his own kind. Behind them, the alarm still echoed faintly, swallowed by storm and distance. Ahead lay only darkness, unknown and vast. Kira tilted her head back, her voice rolling like thunder, softened by rain. "They said I kill, but I keep." Liam closed his eyes against the sting of wind, against the weight of everything he had left behind. "And I won't let you go," he whispered. Her stride resumed, carrying him deeper into the wasteland, into a future that belonged to neither her people nor his. The colony would remember the night the giantess escaped and the traitor vanished with her. But for Liam, the story had already changed. He was no longer the man who walked past the cage. He was the one who had opened it and been claimed in return. The storm swallowed them whole, two figures bound not by chains, but by a promise that neither iron nor fear could break. The wasteland stretched before them, a horizon of stone and shifting sand, endless and indifferent. Kira carried Liam for hours without rest, her pace unbroken, her wounds ignored. When she finally set him down beneath a jut of rock, the storm had dwindled to a steady hiss, a curtain of dust settling over the world. Liam's legs trembled as he stood on his own. He had dreamed of escape, but reality pressed heavier now. They were alone, hunted, and every step forward pulled them deeper into exile. Kira crouched nearby, her immense frame hunched against the jagged ridge. She tore a length of chain still clamped to her wrist, letting the broken links fall into the sand with a sound like spilled coins. For the first time since she left the cage, her shoulders sagged. Liam saw the blood dark on her skin, bullet wounds shallow but numerous. He stepped closer, awkwardly raising a strip of cloth torn from his shirt. "You need this more than I do." Her gaze dropped to the offering, then to him. Slowly, she allowed him to press the cloth against one of the cuts. His hands shook, dwarfed by the scale of her body, yet she did not flinch. "Why?" she asked. He frowned. "Why what? Why care? Not yours, not human." The question pierced deeper than the storm's cold. He tied the cloth in place and met her eyes. "Because I couldn't watch them break you. Because you're not what they said. You never were." Her lips curved faintly, though whether it was a smile or a grimace, he could not tell. "You see, others blind." She shifted, resting her arm across her knees, her face lowering until her breath stirred the sand around his feet. "Now you hunted too." The truth weighed between them. Liam imagined patrols fanning out from the colony, searchlights piercing the storm, rifles ready. His name would already be cursed in the mess halls, branded traitor. He was no longer one of them. He belonged nowhere except here, in the shadow of the woman who had claimed him. They moved again at dawn, Kira keeping the canyons where stone walls hid their trail. She walked in silence, but her presence filled the space like a tide. Liam followed on foot whenever he could, though his legs faltered, and she would lift him without asking when his strength failed. Each time she carried him, he told himself it was necessity. Yet each time, he felt the truth settling deeper. She carried him not as burden, but as something she refused to lose. By the third day, exhaustion gnawed at them both. They found shelter in the husk of an old mining station, its machinery long since scavenged, its walls cracked and scorched by past wars. Kira lowered herself into the dark, her breath ragged. Liam scavenged what little he could, dried rations left to rot, a cracked water drum half filled by storm runoff. He brought them back and set them at her side. She ate slowly, eyes never leaving him. "You give again." He shrugged. If I stop, you'll fall. And if you fall, he trailed off, unwilling to imagine it. Her hand moved, hesitant, then settled against the ground beside him, palm open. He understood it as invitation. He stepped into the shadow of her hand, his smaller fingers brushing the ridges of her skin. Her voice dropped low, softer than he had ever heard it. Not fall, not while you here. The intimacy of the moment startled him more than her strength ever had. She was a giantess, scarred and hunted, yet her need for him was as fierce as his need for her. For a time, they sat in silence, the ruins holding their secrets. But peace could not last. That night, lights flared on the horizon, distant search beacons sweeping the land. Kira rose, muscles tensing, chains clinking faintly. Liam felt his chest tighten. They're close. She turned to him, expression unreadable in the dim glow. You afraid? Yes, he admitted, but not of you. Her gaze lingered on him, and then she nodded once. Then we fight, together. The words bound them tighter than any chain ever could. He realized then that their flight was no ending, only a beginning. The colony would hunt them, her people might not welcome him, and survival would demand more than either of them alone could give. But the decision was already made, written in the first piece of bread he had slid through the bars. As the searchlights grew brighter against the night, Kira lifted him once more. Her voice rumbled like distant thunder, fierce and certain. They cannot take. You are mine. He clung to her, heart steady despite the fear. And you're not theirs anymore. The mining station fell away behind them as Kira's strides carried them into the dark. Ahead lay pursuit, danger, and a world neither of them fully understood. Yet as Liam pressed his hand against her skin, he felt the strange certainty that whatever waited, they would face it together. The night closed over them, but the bond they carried burned brighter than any beacon, a defiance that no storm could extinguish. Kira moved like a phantom through the ravines, her strides long but deliberate, each step chosen to leave as little trace as possible. Liam clung to her shoulder, the rough texture of her skin grounding him as the world blurred beneath them. The searchlights swept closer, arcs of white cutting across the dark wasteland. Every time they flickered near, Kira froze, body taut as drawn steel, her hand curling protectively around him. Only when the beams turned away did she move again. By dawn, the lights had faded, but the threat had not. Smoke rose faintly on the horizon where the colony's hunters burned signal fires, marking their search grids. Liam knew they would not relent. The outpost had lost its most valuable prisoner, and his defection made it a humiliation they would not allow to stand. He also knew they had vehicles, sensors, weapons, far more than he and Kira could resist for long. They took refuge in a canyon where the wind carved the stone into jagged arches. Here Kira set him down and sank against the wall, her body trembling with fatigue. Liam saw the wounds she had hidden, gashes reopened from their flight, skin scorched by grazing fire. He gathered what little supplies remained and did what he could, binding the worst of them with torn cloth and scraps of wire insulation. She endured his clumsy efforts in silence, but when he finished, she whispered, "You fix me, as you fix machines." He almost laughed, though the sound was hollow. "You're no machine." Her gaze softened, the corners of her mouth lifting faintly. "No, but yours to mend." The words lingered, heavier than her wounds. He realized then that she wasn't only speaking of injuries. To her, the bond between them was not convenience, not survival, it was a claim. A tether forged the moment he fed her and sealed the night he freed her. It terrified him as much as it steadied him. They rested in shifts, though Liam scarcely slept. Each time his eyes closed, he imagined soldiers cresting the canyon walls, rifles glinting in the sun. When Kira finally stirred, she reached out with a finger and brushed his shoulder, the touch surprisingly gentle. "Fear makes you small," she murmured, her broken accent giving the words a raw gravity. "But you are not small to me." Her certainty cut through him like a blade. He had always been small, just another worker, another forgotten name in the colony. Yet in her eyes, he was something else entirely. He wanted to believe it, even as the weight of pursuit closed in. Their respite ended with the sound of engines. Distant at first, then growing louder, the metallic growl reverberating through the stone. Liam scrambled to his feet. "They've found us!" Kira rose, towering, chains dragging like broken wings. Her eyes burned with fury, but when she looked at him, there was only calm. "Stay close." The hunters arrived in armored transports, kicking up clouds of dust as they rolled into the canyon mouth. Soldiers poured out, rifles gleaming, their shouts echoing off a stone. Liam's stomach nodded. There were too many. Even Kira could not withstand such fire for long. Yet she did not charge blindly. She moved with precision, using the canyon walls to shield them, hurling boulders torn from the ground to scatter vehicles. When bullets struck, she gritted her teeth and pressed forward, shielding Liam behind her body. He shouted at her to fall back, to save herself, but she only roared in defiance, voice rolling like thunder through the ravine. Amid the chaos, Liam saw an opening, a gap in the canyon wall where a collapsed shaft led deeper underground. "There!" he shouted, pointing. Kira followed his gaze and without hesitation seized him, sprinting toward the crevice. The soldiers gave chase, but the shaft was narrow, the walls crumbling. Kira forced her massive frame through, stone shattering as she wedged herself inside. The earth groaned, dust raining down. Behind them, gunfire ricocheted against collapsing rock. Then the canyon sealed in a roar of rubble, cutting off pursuit. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths. They crouched in the dark, Kira's body pressed close around him, shielding him from falling debris. When the dust settled, he realized they were entombed in an ancient tunnel, the air heavy with age and damp. Kira shifted, lowering him gently to the ground. Her face was streaked with blood and dust, but her eyes still burned. "Safe for now." Liam pressed a hand to her arm, his own body trembling. "You could have left me. You should have. They want you, not me." Her hand rose, enclosing his shoulder in a grip that was both tender and unyielding. "Wrong. They want Jane. I want you." The words echoed in the dark, undeniable and final. Liam felt something inside him break and reform, as though her certainty had reshaped him into someone new. He was no longer a fugitive mechanic, no longer a traitor. He was hers, and she was his, bound by a promise that neither bullets nor stone could sever. The tunnel stretched ahead into blackness, unknown and perilous. Liam swallowed hard, the enormity of it pressing down. Yet when Kira extended her hand, he placed his within it without hesitation. Together they moved forward, the rubble sealing the past behind them. Whatever waited in the depths, ruin, hope, or discovery, they would face it side by side. And though fear still gnawed at him, it was no longer the fear of being hunted. It was the fear of losing the bond that had already become the only truth he could not live without.